everyone. Welcome. Whilst we're waiting for everyone to join, please do put your name and where you're calling from in the chat. And if you have the bandwidth, please keep your cameras on. It's always nice to see who's here. And yeah, maybe share what is drawing you to the second conversation around where to for philanthropy.
Oh, salam. Hi.
How are you?
በጣም እናመሰግናለን። አንተ ቆንጆ ትመስላለህ። ብቻ አማርኛ big trouble.
Angela, I don't know if anybody knows Angela. Angela's a very old friend. It's great to see you, Angela.
Nice to see everyone. Please put your names and where you're calling from in the chat, and please, something that really resonates or burns you in this question topic.
Yes.
Hello, Anshlanshla. How are you? Hi, Barry. Nice
Ciao,
to see
Pietro.
you.
Hi, I'm cooking at the moment, so I'm going to turn my camera off. Can you see the lovely other foundation?
That looks good, Ashley.
Doesn't
It
cooking
smells wonderful, Ashley. So,
Nice to see.
yeah, nice to see everyone. I'm going to hand over to Jerry now. I know there's still a number of people joining, but I think Jerry can maybe set the scene for today's conversation. So, Jerry, over to you.
Fine. We've only got an hour and a half, and I'm intending not to speak for more than 3 to 4 minutes overall. So I will be very much a traffic cop. What I'd like to do is just set the scene a little. We had this very, very deep, I think, conversation last week with Lucy, and I think this is in some ways very much a continuation of it, because it's actually talking about the challenges and the changes that we need to see in our industry, and some kind of sense of prognosis of what we're up against going forward in different parts of the world. And we're very lucky to have 5 people who really represent very different perspectives. They're not going to talk for very long, but they will kind of give us a sense of where they're coming from and what they see as the main kind of challenges. We're not really about doing tassography, which is the name of actually what reading tea leaves or coffee grains is about. We're about trying to say that there are ways of anticipating and taking stock of where we are and making a sort of to-do list of the things that we really need to do. And I'm hoping that this group will help us get into a deep conversation about that. And I know that time is limited, so I will try and shut up. So please forgive me. My friend Akwasi always says it's really important to introduce people. What I'm going to do is assume you've read the bump, and that we have 5 very prominent thought leaders in this business who will kind of help guide us to a conversation. But I'm not going to introduce them one-on-one. I'm going to start by sort of the worldview, if you like, and I will go straight to Samira. Samira, without any introduction, would you please just give us a sense from the Wings perspective of where things are as we sit here in January 2025, I'm so sorry.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks, Tamsin. Hi, everyone. I am Samira. I'm the Collective Intelligence and Advocacy Director at Wings. For those of you who may not know, Wings is a constellation of 230 networks and change makers who connect and engage in coordinated action and who themselves represent over 100,000 philanthropic actors worldwide. When we were preparing for this call, one of the questions Jerry asked us was, what is keeping us up at night? And I think this links in well to the conversation where Lucy shared her book and her insights last week. And I think one of the points that struck me was that we aren't truly listening and learning. and we must. The trend of closing civic space has been documented for decades. According to the Civicus Monitor 2024, 73% of the global population now resides in spaces that are either repressed or closed. According to the Economic Intelligence Unit, the Democracy Index, 7.8% of the population lives in full democracies versus 39.4% in authoritarian regimes. And then there's the whole spectrum in between. This did not happen overnight. What and how are we learning from the experiences of those who have been living, surviving, protecting, and pushing back against these challenges? 9 countries experienced improvements in their civic space ratings, according to the Civicus Monitor. There are playbooks of practices out there, but how are we learning from them, and at what speed are we implementing, preparing? I were chatting after the discussion, and one of the things that we were reflecting on is at what point does it become real for me, for us? At what point or instance of this slow erosion of basic freedoms will it feel real? Is it when I can't access WhatsApp, I can't make a statement, I can't go and protest? What are those red lines for each of us, and will it be too late by then? And with everything that's going on, sometimes I feel alert and sometimes I just feel numb. So I'd like to acknowledge that in last week's conversation, I appreciated the fact that we held space for feelings of hopelessness, despair, anger, disappointment. And so moving from that, what helps me go back to sleep and wake up with hope? Stephen Hines says in his book, The Logic for the Future, the greatest danger in times of turbulence is not turbulence itself. So for me, the challenge is that we lose sight of the bigger picture, the erosion of fundamental values and principles that act as a guiding North Star for us as individuals, and the paralysis of action or the courage due to crippling fear. He says the time of extreme challenge offers us a moment to respond. And I don't think there is any other option. And for me, this means bringing ideas from the sidelines to center stage and to respond by design and intentionality, because some of these situations are set up by design. And so 3 reflections that I'd like to share. One, I think this is a crucial moment to embrace a broader narrative of philanthropy, a learning from the global majority that philanthropy is entrenched in long-standing cultures of giving, concepts such as Ubuntu, Dan, Arambi, which symbolize solidarity, interconnectedness, generosity. When it comes down to it, the love of humanity. It's not just big philanthropy, it's all of what comes in between. It's individual giving, it's community funds, it's indigenous philanthropy, it's corporate giving, and so much more. It's both financial and non-financial currencies, and we need to grow and strengthen these cultures of giving and this diversity by investing in the ecosystem, the field that supports and strengthens it. This builds trust within society, which is precious in a time where political and social contract is under severe erosion. Now, the scale, the pace, the complexity, the interconnectedness of the challenges demand faster and broader transformation. Philanthropy needs to transform to address root issues and not just the symptoms, and we need to do so with humility. I recognize there are pockets of transformation that are taking place, individuals, organizations that are thinking about deeper transformation. And at the same time, there is a significant proportion of those who are still at a very different point on their journey. And we need to engage the unengaged so we are all moving towards transformation and, more importantly, towards action. At Wings, we've been working with our members and the broader field on the Philanthropy Transformation Initiative to co-create, say, a common global framework connected that draws on the collective wisdom, the expertise, the ideas across the sector from across different geographies and work to really inform and influence the norms and principles that shape the field. The goal really is how does it enable us to move concretely towards action? And a big emphasis of this work is around creating mindset shifts for behavior change. So how does philanthropy really adopt and enable a mindset? How do we seed power and be at the service of others, of communities, of movements, of other sectors? How do we really align value, align everything from grant making to the way we're set up behind values, and really look at how we balance short and long-term goals? And so this is the moment that we can bring what's happening on the edges to the mainstream to address challenges of political will and short-term attention. sometimes that to move things forward. And we can do this by storytelling on how people are making that change happen to multiply efforts. And I think the proof really needs to be in how we implement things moving forward. We need more of this, and we need to do it together. And I recognize that we live in very different, multiple realities. What is domestic can be global and vice versa. And so philanthropy needs to organize, it needs to collaborate, it needs a collective and inclusive voice at the global stage that represents the diversity of our sector. And so we can influence global development policies, so we can show up as a positive force, we can propose solutions, we can encourage the right conditions, we can set up spaces that are inclusive. And we've seen this collective action in philanthropy's engagement in the G20. Now, the G20 represents 80% of the world's population and 85% of the world's GDP. And as part of the first ever Philanthropy for Sustainable Development Working Group, as part of the Civil 20 group, which brought together, say, maybe 470 philanthropy and civil society actors, the collective efforts of this group, along with others, resulted in the first ever mention of philanthropy in the G20 Leaders Declaration this year, and several references to the importance of domestic resource mobilization and the need for policies to make that happen. I get that these multilateral spaces aren't perfect and that they have a lot of challenges, but they do offer us a space to come together with others to influence governments. And so I think where I'm going to finish off is that we need to coordinate these efforts across different levels, horizontally and vertically, and to learn with and from each other. And we have these networks and field builders and catalysts. We need to invest in them to make them visible and to develop our collective powerful playbook of practices moving forward.
Thank you so much, Samira. Thank you for the rapid fire. I'm sorry I obliged you to do it like that. I'm going to move with no further ado to Emma Blecher from Ploughshares, who has a background in nuclear, working with nuclear problems. So I think she can bring a new perspective to philanthropy. Emma, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Jerry. And hi, everybody. I'm Emma Belcher, president of Ploughshares, as Jerry mentioned, and we're the largest philanthropic organisation that's solely dedicated to reducing the nuclear threat. We were founded in San Francisco over 40 years ago, but now we also operate out of Washington, D.C., and that's where I'm speaking to you from today. I would like to first thank you, Jerry and Tamsin, for bringing us together. And special thanks to Tamsin for welcoming me into this remarkable community. I'm a relative newcomer to this space, but I've been already deeply inspired by the people, the ideas, and shared commitment to transformative change that I found here. So thank you very much. As Jerry said, nuclear weapons is what I focus on. So I'm going to take us maybe into more of a sort of a case study about nuclear, but make sure that I'm talking the point I want to get across is that nuclear needs to be connected to broader issues of philanthropy writ large, and we really need to de-silo our grant making. So along the lines of what keeps me awake, nuclear weapons are really forefront of my concerns. They have catastrophic potential, yet they receive insufficient attention in today's increasingly dangerous and unpredictable world. Right now, we're seeing rising nuclear threats with multiple wars raging across the globe, nuclear weapons being used as threats to protect states' interests. Treaties that were once helped to manage these risks are being ignored, abandoned, or left to expire without plans for renewal. And alarmingly, we're witnessing a new nuclear arms race, with stockpiles projected to increase for the first time in decades, which is really reversing decades of progress since the end of the Cold War, the height of the Cold War. Now, in the United States, where I'm based, this build-up alone carries an astronomical price tag, with trillions of dollars planned for nuclear modernisation over the coming decades. And that's a staggering amount, and just think how else we might better spend some of that money to the causes that all of you on this call care so much about. At the same time that we're seeing rising threats, we're seeing the interconnection or intersection of global crises, rising authoritarianism, spread of misinformation, unrestrained artificial intelligence, climate change, pandemics, and other crises. And all of these are fueling anger, violence, and instability. So these issues intersect with nuclear threats, amplifying their dangers, and complicating potential solutions. And I think, if anything, we're talking here obviously about the polycrisis dynamic, and nuclear threats are quintessential examples of the polycrisis phenomenon. A single detonation could derail decades of progress on other global challenges, on the causes that all of you work so hard to advance. If we have a single detonation, we'll see a focus shift away from these causes and issues and progress to emergency management, and authoritarian tendencies will likely take root. And this sort of derailment concept is one that I borrowed and adapted from Laurie Leybourne. I'm not sure if he's on the call, but my gratitude to Laurie. And beyond immediate destruction of a small nuclear exchange, this could disrupt regional climates, block sunlight, alter weather patterns, devastate crops, drive migration, and ignite competition over resources, all of which could trigger further conflict. Yet, despite these interconnected threats, nuclear issues remain neglected in philanthropy and siloed from the broader efforts to address global crises. So let me just tell you a bit about the challenges facing the nuclear field. We have underfunding and neglect. The funding has really plummeted since the end of the Cold War, shrinking to around $50 million today on a yearly basis. And when we compare that to the potential catastrophic devastation, it seems like a drop in the bucket. And because of this reduction in funding, the field has withered, with organisations struggling to survive, experts leaving, a toxic culture that's marked by competition over limited resources. We also see structural weaknesses. The field remains insular and DC-centric, despite the global nature of the problem. It often prioritises short-term results over long-term thinking and lacks cohesion, innovation, and diversity. And these challenges and issues have left us ill-equipped to manage today's challenges or anticipate future ones. Philanthropy has had responsibility for this. But equally, in looking at the positive side, I think philanthropy can play a role busting the system open and rebuilding better. So how at Ploughshares are we trying to respond to this critical challenge? We're adapting to meet the moment by embracing bold intersectional approaches to nuclear risk reduction. We have field building initiatives. We're actually transforming ourselves into one of those catalyst organisations that Samira mentioned, serving as a catalyst for the field, changing the ways we work. We are providing facilitation, back-end support, and connective tissue to empower those practitioners who are closest to the work. We are committed to inclusivity, bringing in traditionally excluded voices, including impacted communities and practitioners from other disciplines. We're actively working to connect the nuclear risk conversation with adjacent fields like climate change, misinformation, AI, and global health to create cross-sector partnerships and break down silos. And one really important thing that we're doing is we're working on cultural and skills transformation. Given the sort of toxic nature of the field that I've described, and I'm happy to expand more in the Q&A, given this, we're insisting that we create conditions for respectful discourse and collaboration, recognising that better solutions require cultural change. We're investing in critical skills for practitioners in the field, like systems thinking and strategic foresight, which have been neglected much more recently or over the last few decades in the nuclear field. We're focusing on intergenerational leadership development by creating programs and mentorship opportunities that bring fresh perspectives into the nuclear field and will sustain the work for decades to come. And we're expanding our storytelling efforts to shift the public narrative around nuclear risks, highlighting not only the threats, but also the pathways to collective action and hope. And we're engaging in collaborative efforts. We're building a cohort of funders and practitioners working together, co-creating a strategic plan to reinvigorate the field. The plan's going to identify the shared vision, align efforts, and present new opportunities for investment, maximising the chances of long-term success. Now, all of this, I've got to be honest, has been really challenging. There's been significant resistance to change from those with entrenched interests. But I find enormous hope in the growing number of collaborators embracing this change. Some of you are here today on the call, so thank you. And what I'd like to do is invite those of you who might be interested in joining a sort of a broader effort and being part of a solution that reimagines and rebuilds the nuclear field, but connects it to others with this intersectionality and long-term vision at its core. If you're interested in joining this, I'd love to connect, because I think together we can meet this urgent moment that we're faced in the world and create a safer and more secure future. So I'll leave it with that and happy to answer questions in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Emma. Thank you for sticking to the time that we agreed. We're going to move on to somebody who explores the structural roots of global challenges through the work in new economics, governance, and whole person development. And Evan, I can't think of a better way to segue from the massiveness of what Emma was describing to somebody who is spending time thinking about how do we approach things differently. So Evan, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Evan Steiner. I'm calling in from the Bay Area. I work for an organization called One Project, which focuses on building capacities in the new economy space. And so I hope responding to the poly crisis by building new economic capacities. I can give a little more detail on that. And I'm going to go based off of some of Jerry's original prompts. And one of them is what is keeping us up at night was something that was offered in the pre-call. And I'd share that some nights I have a lot of challenge, but one of the things I'm trying to do is really create a lot of the psychological space and not let certain actors or organizations or people or things that are occurring just really occupy too much of my mind and keep me up at night. And some nights it goes better than others. And I think one of the capacities that's really important at this moment, kind of going to that lens of whole person development, is I think Samira also mentioned it, like experiencing anger and sadness and being with the emotional processing of it and really being with each other through this and building community. And I don't only say that from like it's a nice thing to do or that it sounds kind of fluffy, but I mean strategically. I think that we need to be able to show up to the difficult emotions and experiences, one, to be able to respond to the moment, but also because if we can't, it keeps us in a place of denial and it takes us out of the reality and taking stock of where we are. And so I just wanted to start there, that I think there's a real value just in the being together as we are in this call and not avoiding the emotional dynamics and the real kind of psychological challenges, and make sure that we're keeping space for it as well as understanding that it's an important aspect of strategy. Another question that was prompted us was anticipating and taking stock of where we are. And I also think this is a really important capacity for philanthropy that sometimes we do a good job with and sometimes where we fall short. I like to say that if we haven't integrated the poly crisis, it means that we're going to suck at strategy. Because we're going to be engaging with the world the way that we'd like it to be rather than the way that it is. And so really taking this multifaceted lens, whether you call it poly crisis, meta crisis, great unraveling, there's a lot of terms, but I think it's a really important aspect, not only for having an analysis, but really looking at what are given where we are, what are the kind of the normative responses, what are the strategies and tactics that we should be pursuing. And so I think really grappling with that is really important. And honestly, just also being really clear and candid that a lot of the strategies and tactics that have been pursued in recent decades either haven't worked or are not quite sufficient. And so I pay a lot of attention to the difference between the narrative that there's in the media or different in philanthropy that people are sharing versus the reality. And there's a lot of examples, but just to give a couple, One would be in the renewable energy space, where there's a lot of focus on, building solar and wind has been the primary narrative for the while, and that's very appropriate. And at least so far, we have not been replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy. We've just been adding on top of it and using more aggregate energy. So fossil fuel use continues to go up while solar and renewable energy go up. So that's a different descriptive nature of what's occurring versus the narrative that we're replacing one with the other. And so it also points to that we not only have to build the positive new thing, but also break down the bad. And as we see also with the current administration, really fighting back against the bad is very difficult, and is a different set of strategies and tactics, which definitely exist in many cases, but it's just to have that real clear analysis. Another example would be in organic food. Like, there's been over the recent decades, there's been a large growth in the organic food space, and there's still increasing pesticide use. There's still increasing land degradation. And so it's not only the increasing of something that we like, but also needing to decrease the things that are causing harm. And I think just being really honest about that, and so that we have a much more descriptive nature of where we are and what are the appropriate responses, and what's the situation that we're going to be navigating. And there's a lot of good organizations that I think do provide some of that analysis, but sometimes it's on the edges. It's not necessarily seen, or maybe it's inconvenient, so it hasn't been integrated quite as much. And then building off that, I wanted to offer just a few different, I would say, capacities to respond, or ways of thinking about navigating the poly crisis, and the role of philanthropy in that space. And one of them, just to start off with, is just grappling with the inherent complexity of it. I think there's a lot of the nature of philanthropy often is somewhat siloed, or sort of like singular issue. It's, I'm a climate funder, or social justice, or education, or these different kind of like linear verticals, where I think increasingly there's an understanding that these topics are interlinked, or reinforcing, or just kind of inherently interconnected. And I think it's a real challenge in my experience. There's oftentimes a kind of strategic pushback, navigating about the same. And so just embracing the complexity and moving towards it rather than away, I think, is one of the main things that it'd be helpful philanthropy to see. Another capacity that's been mentioned is the coordination around philanthropy. I would also add exploring more participatory funding. It's a lot of where we focus at the organization I work for. One project is really enabling more democratic decision-making around resource allocation, and pushing more of the funding to frontline communities who are closer to the issues. And just wanted to make sure that was mentioned. There's a lot of great organizations like the Participatory Grant Makers Network, or groups like People Powered, or the Participatory Budgeting Project, that have been focused for a long time on how to just enable more democratic decision-making. And I think that it ends up being more effective. It ends up having more buy-in. There's certainly complications, and it takes more certain types of capacities to do it. But I think it's an important area to explore. So it's not just there's the kind of the horizontal of philanthropy working together more effectively, but also empowering frontline communities and pushing power more to the front, I think is a good direction to explore. And then the third that I wanted to mention to close it out, of course, would be exploring alternative economic models and building capacities, because I think a lot of those capacities are helpful to be able to respond. So capacities like mutual aid. There's a lot of terms in the new economy space, and certainly don't have time to get into some of the nuances, but I like a couple in particular, one is economic democracy, another is solidarity economy. And these represent, I think, a number of different types of interrelated capacities, like I mentioned, mutual aid, but also local food production, cooperativism, some of the participatory funding aspects that I mentioned. And so I think these are a lot of seeds that are kind of exist on the margins, but that they're very important, especially navigating some of the more macro global shifts, to be really looking at those like on the ground frontline capacities to respond, to both to protect and to enable local communities is going to be increasingly relevant and helpful. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for that. You must know I care so much about burial associations, rotating credit associations. I think they are probably the most magnificent way in which human beings have shown how important reciprocity and pooled resources can be in times of crisis. So I'm very glad you touched on that. Hannah Stahl, who is the person who deals with, if you like, foresight and the new communities in Europe of philanthropy at Philea. Hannah, it's all yours.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Tamsin, for really creating this space and for giving us an opportunity to engage in this cross-continental conversation and to really take stock of what's happening and grapple with our fears of what is ahead of us. I'm calling in from Brussels. My name is Hannah Stahl, and I'm leading Philea's work on foresight and innovation. For those of you who do not know Philea, Philea is Philanthropy Europe Association. It's an umbrella organization that brings together over 300 members based in Europe, some of them global. And we work both with funders and philanthropy infrastructure organizations. I'm also a co-founder of PEX. This is a space of philanthropy infrastructure practitioners uniting more than 80 networks, local, regional, thematic, global, and European. And my work has been focusing a lot on bringing innovation to the philanthropy field and also bring the long-term perspective and how philanthropy can really pioneer this work. And then when reading Lucy Bernholz's report, I couldn't hide away my background and also my academic background. I'm a Belarusian. I grew up in Belarus, so I have plenty of experience of authoritarianism. This is my experience in school and university, and also my activism in civil society, and later during the protest movement in Belarus, and also my academic research, where I spent quite some time in Moscow at Carnegie Endowment and also High School of Economics, doing research into authoritarianism, which was unfolding, and the Russian state's cooperation with its ally, the Russian Orthodox Church. This is just a background note. And I wanted to start after a great scene that has been presented by colleagues. Samira, she spoke in detail about the closing civic space. We no longer speak about shrinking civic space, but really closing civic space. And this is important. So I'm not going to repeat what she said. Lucy Bernholz's report is really a clear call to action. And I think that this has been the most candid and the most honest reports ever written. And we're being addressed also in a very open manner that we need to act now, because this can be too late. And I think that this is a feeling that resonates really across the continents. We see clearly that civil society and philanthropy is under direct threat, under direct attack. And this in times when we are really facing ever expanding, compounding crisis. So it's actually the time when we need more civil society, not less civil society, while at the same time we feel that our collective capacity is actually constrained. Emma asked wonderful questions, and Evan has brought a lot of examples of what needs to be done. So the question, to repeat what Emma said, why are we still equipped, actually? Because we've known for years where we were headed, and we had this science of shrinking civic space. We had science of our methods and tools not working. So why are we where we are, and how can we improve our anticipatory capacity? How can we actually become better and not just grapple with crisis when it's too late, but actually anticipate crisis and build our resilience to be able to address whatever challenges are coming our way. But when I was thinking about this call, yes, there's a lot of fear, and I definitely see this. Also remembering my time back in Belarus. And this is one of the tactics that actually there is this feeling of fear, and that there is this feeling of inability to act, inability to do something meaningful, and the belief that we're too small, our funding is too small, we're not able to change the direction. And sometimes we're making decisions that are based on fear and that are not actually based on the multiple possibilities that are out there, that are presented to us. But sometimes we just decide based on what is expected from us or what is the cultural norm. But I think that we all agree that today we live in times where the word norm doesn't apply anymore. What is the norm today? This is fundamentally shifting. And this is something that we just need to accept. We need to accept that we will not be able to get back. We will not be able to build back. The fundamental question is actually, how can we build new? How can we create new alternative systems? And Lucy is providing a lot of examples, a lot of very, very good questions. And this is where I see, and this is the foresight perspective, a lot of gaps, actually, a lot of gaps when it comes to this hopeful message of what can be done. What is this alternative system? What is our direction, sense of direction we want to share with civil society and philanthropy and galvanize action and mobilize resources into this direction? These are the big questions to philanthropy. And I think that this is really the time not to be afraid and share this feeling of fear, but actually creating hope and showcasing what works, how we're able to mobilize, and also really sharing the feeling of not being alone, but actually being a massive movement, because I think that we are a massive movement. We're just sometimes not realizing that and not giving credit to what is there and what is possible. So what I observe in our work, and I'm really privileged to be working with people who innovate, who are really on the cutting edges, who are trying to change things, sometimes against all odds. I see that there is a lot of focus on relational approaches. It's a whole philosophy of the global Wazan network. Some of you are part of this. They have brought these approaches even to big conferences, big spaces like Skoll Forum, really saying that it is essential to build trust. It is essential to be in conversation. It is essential to really strengthen relationships, that this is the foundation of everything that we do. I just had a conversation with a small German foundation a week ago, a fantastic foundation, and they said that they do not start the relationship with their partners through a transaction, so through funding, but actually they invite them to lunch or to dinner and have a conversation first to get to know each other and to start a partnership on that note before then deciding on the next steps. And there are many examples of how funders are really rethinking this. I also see that there is a changing culture in philanthropic organizations. This does take time, but there are such examples that give me personally a lot of inspiration. Also, another example of a large private foundation, Robert Bosch Stiftung, where I used to work almost 10 years ago, and I was there just last week. And I was fascinated to see how much the culture of this organization has shifted over the last decade, with very flat hierarchies and very close relationship between colleagues. I heard terms like servant leadership that is really the guiding star of this organization. And it's a large organization. We're talking about 170 employees. So this gives me hope that philanthropic organizations and leaders are recognizing that the context is changing, our world is changing, and we cannot find solutions through hierarchical organizations and hierarchical relationships in these organizations. Another example is self-governance and decentralization also taking place in philanthropic organizations in numerous networks. One of them is Leap Collective or PAX, I'm also part of. which is governed by a decentralized team. It's a lot of work that goes into this direction, but you can see the fruits and the results when you invest in trust and invest in building relationships, and what becomes possible when there is a collective action behind this. And one last point I wanted to make, and a call to action, is really how philanthropy can contribute to a long-term perspective that is so much missing. And I think that this is the big dilemma I'm taking away from the report, where Lucy is highlighting that the autocrats have the power and the resources, and they have a long-term perspective, and they're mobilizing resources towards that direction. And Barry Knight, so with whom we work a lot together, he's been making this important comment in the call last week, that the far right has been organizing since the 30s. And we've seen these examples. Barry, I don't know how many times you've been pointing our attention to the Project 25 and how it is being shaped. So there are examples of how autocrats and how the far right is really organizing. And then the question to us in philanthropy, why we're still that disparate, why we're still that separate, and how can we organize better? How can we organize collectively? And how can we really focus on the long term, knowing that the crises and the challenges we're facing are longitudinal in nature, be it wars and violence we need to address, be it democratic backsliding, be it climate crisis. Any topic that we take require 10, 20, 30 years in investment. So it's not time for little project approaches and focusing on 1 year time horizon, but we really need to be brave and mobilize and say, this is the direction in which we need to go, and how can we do this collectively? Jerry, I have spoken for way too long.
That's okay. It's good. It's very good to hear you, Hannah. And with no further ado, I'm going straight to Louise Driver from IPASA, South Africa. And you're bringing this to a tail end. Thank you all for your patience. Louise.
Thank you, Jerry. And I'll be short and sweet, partly because going last, a lot of what I want to say has been said, and also because of the time. So, yeah, I'm the Executive Director of the Independent Philanthropy Association South Africa, and we're a membership organization of private foundations investing in South Africa. And what the question, what keeps me up at night? I think at the moment, for me, the biggest challenge is the lack of government support and recognition of civil society, of the nonprofit sector, and its role in South Africa. And instead of supporting it, it's actually restricting it. Just over the last year, we had firstly, the nonprofit directorate and the Department of Social Development failed to pay subsidies for months to many of the nonprofit organizations delivering essential services to the poorest communities in South Africa. This caused many services to either have to shut down or significantly scale down, which had disastrous effects. Further, many of the subsidies were subject to fraud and corruption with the disbursement of funds. And again, the nonprofit sector and the social service organizations suffered. Then after that, then they put a whole bunch of compliance issues that the compliance regulations that the nonprofit sector had to follow, and those were really rigorous. Many of the smaller nonprofit organizations could not keep up with them. They didn't have the resources, the systems, the expertise to do so. And also, with this compliance issue, the nonprofit directorate worked out that 56% of the nonprofits in South Africa were non-compliant and therefore were threatened of deregistration, which would have a real ripple effect on services to the poor and marginalized. And further to that, they introduced there was the grey listing issue last year. So South Africa was threatened by grey listing by the Financial Action Task Force, where there was seen as a potential misuse of non-profits for terrorist financing and money laundering. And this, there was a collaborative effort between government organizations and private sector partners, where they produced a report on the non-profits' exposure risks to terrorist financing. And therefore, the sector was put under intense scrutiny, and stricter supervision measures were put in place when they're already being quite strictly forced to be compliant. So it really was, it's been really hard. And so the government really hasn't made the nonprofit sector. They haven't recognized them. They've made their life harder. And from the private philanthropy side, so I represent the funders, we also have struggled with the government. They don't recognize us. They recognize the international philanthropies, but the local philanthropies, they don't work with us. And we cannot scale our work without the government. The private foundation have a certain pool of money, but we cannot escalate our solutions without government funds. And we've seen this a bit now in the lead up to the G20 here in South Africa, is that struggling with civil society with government, we're struggling to actually get it off the ground. And it's a real issue at the moment, because we're not sure what's going to happen to the C20 with the politics which is happening within the government. But and so that's on the non-profit and philanthropy side of government. And the other thing which keeps me up at night is one of the biggest problems we're trying to solve now as a group of philanthropists is the growth of youth unemployment in South Africa. It's currently at 54%. I mean, that is just, and this is the future. We're talking about the future of philanthropy, and yet our future population are going to be unemployed, do not have money to take our work further. So it is a big problem we're trying to address. That said, there are things which are really positive happening in philanthropy in South Africa. We're really having some positive progress in collaboration. We've just launched a social justice funders group initiative, and to crowd in more social justice funding into the challenges here in South Africa. And we've had great participation. We also are about to launch a climate pledge, a South African funders climate pledge, and great collaboration among funders, both in developing the pledge and now hopefully in signing and implementing the pledge. And then there's also been a lot of collaboration in supporting community-led philanthropy, community-led systems change. There were quite a few of our members are now becoming intermediary funders, regranters, and channeling funding through them to smaller grassroots organizations who really are close to the issues they're trying to solve. So there's a real recognition of the value of these community organizations and their work. Have I run out of time, Jerry?
Yeah, you have.
Okay. Again, I just say one the last thing. There's definitely a growth in innovation in the funders I work with, and when we looking about the future and looking at innovate, we need to do things differently. We need to fund new things. There's a big focus on innovation, on risk taking, which I think is going to which is a positive progress.
Thank you. I'm sorry I had to do that to all of you. I apologize in advance. My favorite author in the world, the poet, the person I get most inspiration from, once said this: "Man thinks because he rules the earth, he can do with it as he pleases. And if things don't change soon, he will. Oh, man has invented his doom, and the first step was touching the moon." This is Bob Dylan. And I just wanted you to reflect on that a bit, because I thought it caught some of what you are all been saying, and certainly threw us back to what Lucy was trying to ask us last time and share with us. I'm now open to questions, comments, engagement. We want this audience to come alive. Put your hand up and we will let you in. And if no one wants to do that, we'll go for another round. Go ahead, Lucy.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks, everyone. I want to just thank everyone who just shared extraordinary examples of what I see as sort of one of the two challenges in trying to move philanthropy. There's the will and there's the way. And I think we've got some fabulous examples of the way. And when you expand out from just changing philanthropy and you think about just thriving in autocratic societies as individuals or collectives or even surviving them, there's also a lot of way. We know a lot about how to do this. Now, getting people to learn it and act on it and understand it, that's a different challenge. But I think the way, there's a lot there. What I have failed to understand for most of all of my professional career in this space is what's the will? So part of the challenge is we're talking about a very broad group of things under the auspices of philanthropy. And I couldn't agree more that, the definitions and sort of the understandings captured are slowly, we're on the way to becoming more inclusive of traditions that have lasted far longer than the essentially 2 centuries it's taken humanity to destroy the world. It's only taken us 2 centuries. I mean, Dylan will start 40 years ago. I'd start with the steam engine. But so this question of the will, I think, is really challenging. And I think one of the parts of that is our often assumption that we're all on the same page. I said this last week also, like, who are we really talking about? If we're a movement, who are we? And what are we moving toward? Are all things I think big institutions can be helpful with, but I think those are small community questions that have to be answered and aggregated from there. I also think, and I just want to say that I think we have a real timescale problem right now in the United States. I don't think we're playing on the same timescale that the current administration is. They are trying to completely undo guardrails, laws, codes, and norms in the next 3 months. And if their first 2 days are any example, nothing is standing in their way. And the only thing that will stand in their way is going to be civil societies. One of the speakers mentioned that this is civil society's great moment. My God, it certainly is. I mean, it's the only thing that will do it that's going to stop this complete restructuring of the United States experiment and the end of the Democratic Republic.
I wanted to just say how much that resonates. I got a letter from a close friend who works with the ACLU this week. And I had written to say how much I was thinking of them, because last time, if you remember, they sent people to the airports immediately to stop deportations. And I was just saying I was thinking very hard about you because I imagine it's very different. And the letter I got back was really quite despondent, because it was basically saying we were dealing with amateurs 8 years ago. We're dealing with professionals now. Yeah,
absolutely. I identified myself last week as a gay disabled Jew, and, on close to the coalface of this. But 2 days ago, my wife and I were asked if we would take in the daughter of a family of friends if they're deported. That's the coalface. That's the coalface.
Barry?
Unmute. I think before the steam engine, I would go back to the Enlightenment and the notion of progress. The Enlightenment invented the idea that societies had to develop, whereas many societies actually saw themselves as finding balance within and between each other. And the big problem that was invented through the Enlightenment was free market economics, which prioritized economic growth. And it's become a cancer because that actually lies behind so much of the idea of scarcity, the 1932 definition of economics by Robbins, the allocation of scarce resources, which means that we're all in scarcity and we never reach the point of enough. So greed broke down the welfare states post-1945 across Europe and in many other parts of the world. And in the past 50 years, the progressive story has been trying to restore the deleterious effects of capitalism and economic growth and the rise of the Gini coefficient measuring inequality since 1977 upwards and onwards. We've never developed our own story, and we have allowed society, therefore, to collapse. And I think the idea of the great unraveling predicted some years ago, and then the great turning, I think we could see the wholesale collapse of our societies, the breakdown of all the systems. And I think philanthropy sees itself as actually saving us from that. I'm not actually sure we can. I think things have perhaps gone too far and too fast. We've been like, as Hannah said, we have known about this for years, and we're a bit like Christopher Clark and his book on the sleepwalkers about the onset of the First World War, where the breakdown of alliances inevitably led to war. And I think the only way we can think about this is not a philanthropic revolution, but a human revolution. We have to think, what is it to be human? And we need to go back. There's a time that in 1929, there was a debate between Ernst Cassirer and Martin Heidegger about what is it to be human. We need to go back to that, because while we are seeing ourselves as an egoic self, where careers and we need to make money and we need to be part of an industry, we're actually going to keep making the mistakes and we're never going to collaborate. We need to see ourselves as a transcendental self who sees ourselves as part of nature. And the key thing is our relationships with one another. If you look at there's a really good blog on the Philea website by Halima Mohammed, who's actually been working with a group of women in Africa, reinventing feminist social movements. If you look at that, you're beginning to see the breaking down of borders, and we need to break down the borders of our institutions. What we need to begin to think about the leadership within our worlds and stop thinking about foundations or intermediary organizations, and begin to think about how do we build strong-based people's movements in the face of a new story, a kind of an ascension strategy to bring humanity to a different kind of level. Because while we've got this devil of economic growth actually governing everything we do, and the notion that societies have to get richer in order to be better, we're never going to actually solve anything. And philanthropy is a means, not an end. It can enable us to do that. It can create the kind of venture capitalism for a new way of seeing, but it isn't in itself the solution. It's the means to which we can achieve a new sense of what it is to be human. Without that, we have had it.
Thank you for that. Very, very important comments. Anybody want to come in? Want to argue with Barry? I think of philanthropy not as the institutional philanthropy that we're all kind of representing, but really back to the origins of what the word means. It's really about human interrelationships. And the strongest and the most exciting philanthropy I've seen recently has been essentially community-based, reciprocal, mutual work that's going on, that is extremely strong, that predates colonialism that predates a lot of the things that we're kind of talking about when we talk about philanthropy. It's philanthropy that's been going on all the time. So I take your point, but let's not get too caught up in the language, but think about what it is that we're talking about in terms of how do we get out of here? There must be a way out of here. How do we get out of here? Any comments?
Can I
Thoughts?
add some
Go
reflection?
ahead, Asda.
I am very new to this extraordinary network, and thank you for organizing all this. This is my second time, and forgive my boldness for being so so forward with some of the things that I'm going to say. I am an outsider. I've been in the social innovation space for about 15 more now, 18, 19 years, both as a practitioner and also as a professor of practice. And I've listened to many of the comments being made over the last 2 weeks and also in the past in other networks. And it's very easy for us to be in our positions of power and state the obvious about how we have failed or how we have succeeded. The reality is also, let's not forget, humanity is in a much better state now than it was 50, 100 years ago. The absolutist data show very clearly that we are moving in the right direction. So again, forgive my forwardness and being bold. I will be the voice of discord today. I've also heard a lot about, and it really struck a chord with me, Mr. Knight, Barry, if I may say, about going to the human values or what it is that defines us as humans. I think that is exactly what the conversation should be about. What are our values? What defines human capabilities now and in the next 30 years? Is it truthfulness? Is it agency? Is it reciprocity that I hear? Mutuality, accountability? Is it love? Then also a couple of comments about what has been said about strategy. We use strategy sometimes as if this is a fluffy word that we keep using. Strategy is about resource allocation, right? And it's about capacity for change. And if we are thinking truly in strategic terms, then we can also take a page from other social innovation models that have worked, or also even private sector, public sector, open innovation models that we can draw from to think about what is the future of philanthropy. Sometimes that may even think or may require us thinking in terms of what are future horizons? What are some of the synergies that we can think about in terms of scenario planning? What is the worst case scenario? What is the best case scenario for the sector, for some of the themes, some of the projects? And then lastly, also, there are plenty of, to some of the things that has been stated as well by other speakers, there are plenty of solutions out there, plenty of models that we can draw from. And if we are able to map some of these solutions that work, we can also start thinking about scale. What defines Elon Musk and Thiel and some of the other juggernauts that are destroying or planning to kind of overhaul our systems is that they have scale. They have digital scale. Philanthropy can also draw from that. There's nothing that stops us from saying, how can we create scale? And what might that look like, right? So I just wanted to share some observations around this. I'm building some tools actually around future thinking and also scenarios. If there's interest around this, I'll happily talk more about this at some other time. It still is in kind of brainstorming stage, but I would love to seek insight and inputs around these things as well.
Thank you. That's very helpful, and I'm sure people will be lining up to communicate with you on the thinking you're doing. Any more comments? Feedback? Go ahead, Catherine.
Hi there. Thanks, Lucy. Great to see you. Couple things. The thing that Lucy just said about the time disconnect, I think is really profound right now. We had a whole era of philanthropy focused on 5 to 8 year windows of goals that people thought could be achieved, and some things were achieved. And I think the boundaries have moved in both directions to the need to be able to move much more quickly and to invest in the long term and do it at the same time. And I think that we need to not lose sight of the fact that whatever's happening kind of up here at the moment, there is still a lot of discretionary resource that is in philanthropy. That at the moment, when part of the strategy is to overwhelm people on the ground, not know which way to turn, philanthropy has discretionary resource to help buy key actors discretionary time, because people's time is having the time to figure out what to do differently, to organize differently, is an extremely scarce resource right now. So if you put the resource of discretionary money with the need for time, a little bit of time to be able to act differently, is I think really a key thing at the moment. In terms of why the will has not been built that Lucy raised, one of the things that I don't know what we do about this, but because it's an ideological problem, people on the left-hand side of the spectrum don't trust power. I mean, what we try to do is distribute power, challenge power, and understand the corruption of power. But if you don't, but you can't fight the kind of concentrated power that's there without building power, without coming to terms with the need to act with power. And I've always loved Martin Luther King's statements about power and love, which if you've never found them are quite, I'll try to look for that and put it in the chat, that you need to have both. And, of course, people's movements are about building power. But I'm with Lucy. I'm mostly working on the 3,000 to 5,000 people who live near me who are absolutely terrified or undocumented immigrants and at the coalface right now. And they're just these both scale problems and time problems that we deal with, but we must not lose sight of the fact that in this moment, we do have discretionary power to use, and moving very quickly to use it is absolutely critical. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That's really sobering and thought-provoking. Alan?
Hi, everybody. I'm just going to come off onto camera. I think, for me, these questions or these conversations sometimes hover in the theoretical and the conceptual. And we've been making commitments to behave differently for years now. And I think that the instruction from the people who have been actively resisting the sort of what we see as visible emergence of authoritarianism now, there have been people that have been doing that for decades. And we've consistently failed them because we haven't been able to line up our practice with our stated values. And I think it's really time that philanthropy actually puts its money where its mouth is and starts funding the kinds of resistance, the kinds of actions that are defending our humanity, and making sure that we do that freely. We have to really, really consider how much the practice of grant making is contributing to communities. I'm not going to say inertia, but an inability to go to that scale that we keep talking about because of the practice that we impose upon them, the limitations of our frameworks that we oppose on acts of resistance, on acts of change, on acts of humanity and solidarity. And so I think this is the era in which philanthropy and all donor organizations are really going to be tested around their commitments to their stated values. And many, many, many are going to be found lacking. And I suppose for me, that's the sobering call. Start doing. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, to just take that one step further, maybe we need to start thinking about what's the role of some kind of online ad hoc community like this, and how can it engage? Lucy, I'm coming back to you.
And
Go
I
ahead.
don't want to hog, but I didn't see another hand. I think there are two incredibly different timescales we're talking about, and both of them are urgent. I agree with the sense that we've talked about this for a long time and haven't changed. So what if we actually looked at an opportunity? I believe that we have 90 days to save the United States democracy. Within those 90 days, there will be direct attacks. They've already started on civil society and foundations, something that is very uncommon in this country, and it's already been happening. The government has fined nonprofits in Georgia for violating the politics line that doesn't really exist. They're actively going after the Internet Archive and Wikipedia. There's going to be more of that. I'm saying this because I believe very much what Samira said at the start and what Catherine Fulton's been telling me my whole life, that things change when the pain of staying the same can no longer be tolerated. And making institutional philanthropy, again, just if that's what we're talking about, or institutional civil society change, what pain do they feel? When do they feel pain? The funders, I mean, seriously, it's a real question. What makes philanthropically rich, resource-rich enterprises feel pain? The only thing I know of, at least in the US context, is the federal government. It's the only thing it's ever made them feel pain or scared them enough to actually just stop talking and do something different. And there is this weird moment coming in the US where the Vice President of the United States and some of the more progressive voices for reform of the sector are aligning around the need to change the sector. So we are facing an opportunity in that. I'm not asking this group to take that on. This isn't I'm only a member here, but I want to put that out as something that's actually tangible, visible in front of us. And if anyone here knows of something I could join that's working to address that, please let me know, because I haven't seen a single recognition of it from the formal associations and institutions of philanthropy and civil society in the US. Not one. Thanks. Didn't mean to send everybody into silence.
Not at all. I think what you've done is put out a very concrete thing that we're all getting our heads around. So I'm giving people time to think about it and not pushing them to talk. But sometimes it's good to have a little bit of silence in these things. But I am looking for hands. I'm not going to call on people that aren't showing an interest in engaging. Go ahead, Sterling.
There, can you hear me?
Yep.
Great, thanks. Listen, I share a lot of the doom and gloom that a lot of us are feeling right now. And this is not only a US thing or autocrats against people for democracy. This is a global problem on many levels: climate change, biodiversity loss, etc. And we're facing similar issues within the UN of we're not realizing the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. And we're looking to create a pact for the future. They created a pact for the future to try to address some of the governance problems we have. So it's system-wide on many levels. But I thought I'm listening to some of these remarks, and what comes to my mind is that we have been here before. So we're not necessarily alone in the process that we're going through in the different countries, but also globally. And just a couple of examples that I think all of us can relate to that. Oh yes, I can remember that situation. And if we put ourselves in the shoes of the people that were at that point, how they dealt with it. I think that they probably felt very much like we do right now. We can talk about, for instance, we're talking about situations where the forces of old that were in power or wanted things to stay a certain way did push back against change, where we're trying to move forward to a better society, a better world, a more equal world, a more sustainable world. So examples, I can go back pretty far back and look at the colonial times in the US when there was a pushback. There was a sense of desire for freedom and get away from colonialism, and we had the Declaration of Independence, but then there was a pushback from the British and we had a Revolutionary War. Same thing in France. We had the French Revolution, then we had the pushback even within the people who were making the change, and there was the Age of Terror, and then the Napoleonic Wars. So with all this uncertainty, we were hoping for better things to happen, and yet there was a pushback. Even civil rights movement, there was a huge pushback. We had a lot of violence and civil unrest in that situation. And that wasn't so long ago. At the end of the World War, we came together to defeat the axis of evil, if you will, and we created the United Nations. There was a lot of hope around the world of the new world that we were embarking against. I've seen videos where we talked about the creation of the UN, what that would mean for the international community, and a whole new way of going about things. Now, we did create the UN, but we got the Cold War. So we again had some pushback and these totalitarian regimes. Now we're in the situation where we're in this evolutionary step right now when it comes to addressing climate change, biodiversity loss. We have these agreements which are transformative. The SDGs, the 2030 Agenda is very transformative. Same thing with the climate agreement. But then we have the force of old pushing back. No, we don't want to deal with climate change. And we're not putting in the political will. So we're finding ourselves in a situation, the possibility of the change that we want to, but a lot of pushback. So in a way, we find ourselves very much in the same kind of cycle of moving towards change and having pushback. So I just want to kind of get that perspective. The people that have been in those situations, they were able to manage to go through that process. So that was just my first thought. And I just wanted to add to that when it comes to discussion about
Quickly
philanthropy.
though, okay? Sterling, we're getting a lot of people wanting to speak.
Sure.
So go ahead.
Can I just add one thing to that?
Yeah, just quickly.
Yeah, so thank you. So when it comes to philanthropy and looking at how we change philanthropy in addressing these challenges, I would say philanthropy, I think, finds itself in a role together with lots of the other constituencies, whether it's private sector, civil society, outside of philanthropy, academic, scientific community. All these institutions and constituents do have expressed willingness to sit at the table and work together for the type of change that we need. There's every single constituency talks about that they want to do it. I think for philanthropy could be a real catalyst to help that uniting. That doesn't have to be dependent on governments, but actually there's a whole ecosystem of institutions, organizations from local to global level that really wants to engage and work in a new systemic way. So I think not only bringing together philanthropy across sectors, but actually the other sectors as well, bringing them together, that's going to create the type of change that we need in order to address the democratic deficit and our reliance on governments and their policies. I'm not against governments per se, but I'm saying we need all those stakeholders to implement the SDGs anyway. So there's a role for philanthropy to be the game changer in making those platforms, the network, the connectivity between all the different stakeholders, and then really invest in relationships.
Thank you. Erica. We can't hear you.
Yes, now you can.
Thank you.
Hi. So in listening to everybody today, excuse me, it occurs to me that it's I don't know how many of you are board members of philanthropic organizations, but I sure would love to see a conversation like this that includes those people who have governance roles in foundations and community foundations and so forth, because I think there's a bit of a mismatch between what those of you who are on the front lines of grant making and investment are sensing right now and the speed with which we really do need to act. As Lucy points out, we have a moment right now. There's a mismatch between the recognition of that and the sensing that you're able to do when you're on the front lines of this work, and the institutional capacity to understand what it is that we're seeing. So then to circle back to boards and to circle back to make the argument that potentially a change in grant making strategy is consistent with the mission of the organization, and to get buy-in at the board level and so forth. There's something about that mechanism that I think is in the way of more united action happening in the moments where it's really most useful. And so I guess I'll just sum up by saying I would love to see an opportunity to have a conversation like this with more board members, to be innovative about the relationship between governance and action in philanthropy.
Thanks, Erica. Megan, I'm coming to you, but please make it very short because I'd like to go back to our 5 speakers in case there's stuff that they feel really hot about. Hannah, I know you've had your hand up, so I'm coming to you first after Megan, okay?
Hi, everyone.
Megan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Haddock. I'm the Executive Director of the International Society for Third Sector Research. And I guess I'm thinking about the conversation more globally, and I can't help, it's my bias that I work with researchers, but I can't help but thinking that the support of knowledge just about the sector generally contributes to this conversation. I mean, in the United States, we have a lot of research centers, but in other countries, there are sometimes 1 or 2 research centers who are documenting what the sector even is, you know, its size and scope. And when when civil society in these countries is being attacked by governments, what sources of information do they have to even present their case in support of their own sector? So I just have to think that like the knowledge base for this conversation is a crucial area of support. I hope that was short enough. Thanks.
Yep, yeah, that was great. Thank you very much for that. Anna, you're on.
Thank you, Jerry. A lot of great points. I wanted to continue actually what Sterling has started, and wanted to share an author that I have been enjoying reading. His name is Peter Turchin, and he wrote The End Times, and what he writes about the state of affairs in the US and also globally. And he analyzed 5,000 years of human history, focusing on collapse of societies or continuation. So essentially crisis and different challenges with which societies and elites dealt in the past. And his conclusion in today's times is that we have 2 scenarios, basically. One is social collapse or breakdown, and the second is elite cooperation. So the question, and we have signs of this everywhere. We have signs of this polarization, popular immiseration, elite overproduction in the US. We have signs of this in Europe as well and elsewhere. The question is how bad it will be, how bad the social collapse will be. And this is a very deep question, because what we see, the election results, those is just the top of the iceberg. The problem is much, much deeper. And the autocrats in power, they're usually the symptoms. They're not the problem. They're really the symptom of what has been happening in the society. And what has been happening in the society, this popular immiseration, the rise of inequalities, of people being in a situation where they have nothing to lose. This is a huge problem that needs to be addressed. So the question, how huge the social collapse will be, how fast will we be able to respond? Lucy, I'm not sure that this is possible in 90 days, of course, because the problems are just so systemic to actually being able to act. And how fast, and elite cooperation is really key. And this is where philanthropy can play a very important role in bridging different stakeholders, in bridging sectors, and accelerate this elite cooperation, because we need to overcome polarization. We need to come to conclusions. And Sterling, your points, there have been such points in crisis in the past, and we have dealt with them, and we have come up with new institutions and with new approaches. And what we see now, we're at a turning point where established institutions do not longer work. And we have very big fundamental questions. What type of institutions do we need? How can we actually make decisions? And this is where the rise of Africa comes in, where the rise of Latin America comes in, the voices that have been utterly underrepresented in the global arena. And that's why also our institutions being not fit for dealing with the crisis that we see.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you. Samira.
I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to rattle off certain things that came to mind. I think we were talking a bit about Project 2025 and the fact that everyone's aware of it. In June 2020, a national commission organized by the American Academy offered a comprehensive blueprint of proposed reforms. This is in Stephen's book, A Common Purpose, Reinventing American Democracy for the 21st Century. 31 recommendations. I haven't read it. I wasn't aware of it. How many of us on this call were? So there is a blueprint for Project 2025 and everyone knows about it. And it's there, it's visible and it's spreading like fire. What do we have to do to get this other playbook of practices that are positive and have a shared concept of the world that we all want, that's equitable, that's fair, that's inclusive out there? And what do we need to do? Because we talk about political will and it's challenging because it's a difficult question to answer. But then what about our political will? We all have agency and power. We are part of this system. And so what do we need to shift? What do we ourselves need to be doing differently? And that will make us uncomfortable. And I think the question about boards is important. And we think about it, brings us influencing the influencers. We see networks as catalysts, as multipliers. We see boards and governance and the executive team, that if you can shift the thinking of multiple, and if you talk about just institutional philanthropy of foundations, that example, that thinking can have a ripple impact because it touches so many other aspects, especially networks. There's at Davos right now, over 370 millionaires and billionaires have a message for world leaders. Draw the line and tax us. This is currently taking place right now. And this is positive. How do we link in and connect the dots to take it a bit further? And I think I'll end the point by knowledge. And for us right now, we are doing a lot of mapping around philanthropy support ecosystems. The newest one is going to be around social movements in Africa and Latin America. And one of the key messages is stronger domestic support is critical to increase the legitimacy and resilience of civil society and to really counter these closing space narratives. There are examples of how the support is taking place, of actions that are taking place on the ground. How do we share that knowledge, help invest in this, and share best practices that we can be taking forward? My boss.
Thank you. Evan, I'm coming to you. I don't know if you want to comment, but if you could make a short final comment, that would be useful. And then I will come to Emma. And finally, I will come to Louise.
No, if it's okay, I think I'll pass.
Okay, thanks, Evan. Emma?
Thank you, Evan. You haven't given me any time to think about what I'm going to say. But I just want to say thank you for the conversation. I think I've been listening intently, and there are a lot of things that I really agree with and am motivated to think, how do we turn the conversation and the ideas into action? I think that to answer to Samira, I think part of why we might have seen, we've got Project 2025 being really successfully put out there, and the sort of corollary that had been developed several years ago not. It's something that I see a little bit in the nuclear field. And that's, I think sometimes some of us tend to think we know the answer, we've got it right, so we'll just say it and everybody will understand and agree. And I think there's a certain amount of probably marketing, narrative shifting, and tactics that we need to engage in that we might have at times thought, oh, we shouldn't be doing that, that's not right or fair or appropriate. but we see the other side has, and we see where that has maybe got them. So I think thinking about how do we, as people who think about these issues, who do we need to engage and bring in to help us really get the kinds of messages out there and to really bring about transformative change? And it probably means bringing in people who aren't in this conversation at the moment. So just a bit of food for thought, because I'm seeing some calories, but just thank you so much. This has been an inspiring and thought-provoking conversation.
Thank you. And Louise, you're going to be the last one to speak apart from Tamsin.
I think Louise sadly had a Wi-Fi issue. Sorry, Jerry.
Oh, so go ahead, Tamsin. Bring us to a close.
I don't have anything to add to that, except thank you for that conversation. I would almost ask Lucy to close. You can hate me later, Lucy.
Yeah, I am. I think this is an extraordinary place you've built, Tamsin and Jerry and Tom and others who've been building it for quite some time now, as I understand it, over a year. And I think we should be clear on what we can do in which space. My experience is conversations like this are really good to talk about ideas that we're not familiar with individually, talk about them collectively, learn about them, think about them, turn them over, question them, all those good things. They're not particularly good places to organize strategy about an upcoming initiative in the EU, South Africa, or the United States. So it might be that it's time for us as a group, if you want to be part of a group. I'm pretty sure Tamsin's going to say there's, not really strict rules on qualifying, to start nudging or feeding this conversation with some ideas, some specific ideas. And I couldn't agree with Barry Knight more. He's a better historian than I am. This might be the kind of place where you can have that where one might participate in conversations about human values and thriving. I am somewhat against my better judgment, launching a philanthropy book club, which I'm doing because I'm very isolated now. I'm very sick. I'm basically homebound. This is how I see people. But what I'm realizing through this conversation, here's what I'm going to do differently based on this conversation. I learn best about human values from art, literature, fiction, and poetry. She says as an academic author of several nonfiction treatises that no one's ever read, including me. Maybe it's that. And I know Barry used to bring music into this space. And Jerry's brought some poetry, Nobel Prize winning poetry. So I think being clear about what you can do in each of the different spaces you're in might help us be more successful in each of those different spaces, whatever success is. And Tamsin, I'm going to get you.
Yeah, well, vengeance is best eaten cold, I think.
No.
Thank you all. I have to say, I hate panel conversations. I hate them. I hate them with a vengeance. So I'm very grateful to Tamsin for forcing me to do this, partly because I learned from each one of you. We don't have the answers. I mean, trust me, for 5 seconds don't think any of us have the answers. But I do think the conversation is important and useful. And I want to say thank you for sharing it with us, for continuing to be with us even when we're dithering along and not being very effective, and for putting up with my stupid chairing. That was really very nice of you. I have enjoyed this session more than I thought I would. I was pretty terrified of what you do with 5 people in an hour and a half. But thank you. And thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your criticism. And please keep it coming. If you have ideas about what we should do, who we should invite, what we should do next, please let us know. It's your community as much as it is anybody else's. Every one of you can drive this train. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.